Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. It is Counter Clipping Show number 118 for April 2nd, 2023. And on April 1st, I managed to troll the entire Wargaming Twitter community. You go check that out if you want. So there's that. I would like to welcome everybody tonight. Thanks for coming out. I hope everybody is doing good. I've been kind of nursing hasn't quite deteriorated into a migraine, but it's been going for the last couple of days, and I just found the ibuprofen like half an hour ago. So hopefully that'll start taking effect any time now. In the meantime, we're going to medicate the traditional way with scotch. So tonight we are drinking the Glenlivet 15. This is a very fine beverage. It is bottled at 40%. And it is a cut above the regular Glenlivet, which is fine, but I don't tend to go buy it. This stuff's quite a bit better. Thank you, Scott Blanchett, for sending that to me. We did manage to we are clipping Fall Blau still, by the way, so we might finish it tonight. I kind of doubt it. I might, however, have it finished by next week, in which case I will have a new unboxing game, and hopefully we'll have the unboxing video for that out already. That is the secret game that I don't want to reveal yet. Fall. So for just FYI, that this week you'll be seeing the unboxing video of Fall Blau, and it is back in print. So I don't know how big that print run was. So it may be a get it now while you can type of situation. In the meantime, I was impressed enough with Kharkov Battles that I knew that I wanted it. So you'll see the unboxing video, which required massive amounts of editing on Thursday. That's already uploaded, so we're not going to miss that this week. Before we get started, let me remind everybody to please do thumbs up the video. Please do subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed through some unhappy mischance. We have super chats and super stickers are on. It's a great way to get your comment highlighted so I don't miss it. We've already got almost 90 people here, so there's a good chance I might miss comments. Do we have something weird going on? Nope, not yet. We did last week, and I think I made the algorithm fairy happy last week, and that's why we had the mysterious appearance of an additional 400 people who swiftly fled. So we can rest assured that we did, in fact, scare them off. So what's going on? So for those who don't know, the show with Dan on Tuesday nights has now, thanks to a new capability in StreamYard, now streaming every week on both channels. So we're also trying to be a little more directed on that show. So good luck telling Dan that, but we should have a special guest tomorrow and look for that trend to continue, because if it's just me and Dan, it's going to be us talking about a bunch of random shit. Me making fun of Canada and that kind of stuff. So before we go any further, let's pull the list of folks up and see how disappointed I am in this YouTube feature today. Let's say hello to Six Actual, Alan Salazar, Andrew Atkin, Brent McKay, Brian Gash, Cyberfield Marshall, Daniel Silverthorne, Daniel Teets, David Imperato, Dicey Odds, haven't seen you in a while. Thanks, welcome back. Greg Grant, HUN644, the legend himself, Fucko, is here. Jeff Anderson, Jeff Taylor, Jeffrey Wesovich, John Stanley, John C., John Longshore is in the house. John C. from the sunny Philippines, I might point out. John Clark, Lee Grant, Mark Dennehy, Matt Davidson, Meandering Mike, Michael Schmaus, Michael Simon, Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, Patty Rafesky, welcome to the stream, Paul West, Ray Garby, Ray Musselman, Rick, it scrolled past me here. Rick Cox, Scott Bell, Sofa King, Stacking Limit, Stigler is in the house. Todd Cox, Tony Mammal, U-Boater 658, Wade Moore, William Aarons. Hopefully I didn't miss too many people, but I just have the list that YouTube is giving me of the folks who are listening in at the moment or watching live, as the case may be. So our topic tonight, and this is, I've got like a big bankroll of potential topics, which I try not to do like the same kind of thing 2 weeks in a row. You know what I'm saying? But also, some of those shows require more substantial preparation than others. This was supposed to be an easy one, and I ended up putting a substantial amount of effort into the upcoming slideshow. So let's turn on the ticker before we forget that. There are links in the video description to all the social media channels, so go ahead and follow me at those places. I am still most active on Twitter. And there is a link to the Ardwulf's Lair Discord server in the ticker as well. We might try and I'd really like a more efficient way to do that, but I haven't come up with anything that won't let every bozo spammer in, and that's going to be a problem. So um, we actually did the um, promotional work this week too, which is unusual. I haven't been doing that. That's my fault. Nevertheless, we got plenty of folks here. David Imperato, if I didn't get you, he went to GMT East this past weekend, had a great time. Saw Marty Sample, Andy Lewis, Mark Herman. That's great. That is very close to New York City. I think I heard, or did they move it? Or is that next time? I forget. That's supposed to be a really good event, but in White Plains, it was also supposed to have been a quite expensive event. So my next event is Buckeye Game Fest, which is in about 3 weeks. There's a link to that in the video description. As usual, the War Room will be opening on Monday. We will be playing La Bataille de Mont. I'll be playing La Bataille de Mont Saint Jean. There'll be at least one and probably two and maybe even three additional tables of La Bataille going. The Marshall Enterprises folks will be there. They are co-sponsors of our good friends at the Players Aid, who managed to secure sponsorship for their appearance at the show. They're going to have a giveaway, and they're going to do a whole bunch of teach and play stuff, and I'm sure they will have nothing but great games to show off. So if you want to see me, you want to see them, whoever you want to see, they're going to be at Buckeye Game Fest. Unless you want to see the OCS people, and there is actually an OCS game too, but none of the far traveled OCS crowd are going to be there at this time. Well, we're going to talk about this, and if anybody's got like a series I'm missing here, I'm not going to tell you what all the series are in advance. And this time, actually, we're going to go through it in the heretofore hardly ever seen alphabetical order, because I was too lazy with this burgeoning headache thing to go and look dates up to do it in chronological order instead. So. But we do have some of the things that have been remarked upon in the chat already are on this list. So let me pull these up, and before I guess we do that, this part of the justification for doing this as a show topic is that I get asked these questions a lot, right? Which OCS game should I start playing OCS with? That kind of stuff. So I kind of thought I would cover a lot of that territory here in this show. And also bear in mind, this is where I am right now with these answers. I reserve the right to change my mind at some point in the future, particularly as new developments arise. I'm also pretty much sticking with game series that I have played or have at least some decent familiarity with. So there are probably ones that I am missing that are not on the list intentionally because I am not familiar enough with them. So, for example, you're not going to see a area impulse game on this list. However, based on the general dialogue that we've been having here on these shows, I have acquired an area impulse game. Now, I was shooting for Breakout Normandy because it's that's a topic I'm highly interested in. What I ended up with, based on what I could get at a reasonable price, was Storm Over Arnhem instead. So that is now on the Unplayed Classics list, which is a topic we'll probably revisit again in about 9 months. So early 2024 to see what progress has been made, what progress hasn't been made, and what the itinerary for working that list down is for next year. So speaking of topics that we've already covered, thanks to everybody for the tremendous response to the transformative war games video. That was very gratifying. And it occurred to me like 2 or 3 days ago that there's a really obvious one that I left off the list. So we're not going to talk about that tonight. I'm not sure how I'm going to kind of do that. I may do a standalone video on it. So we'll see. And it's an obvious one, and it's legally obvious why I forgot it. So let's throw some stuff into trays here. And we appear to be having a mishap of some kind. So we're making pretty good progress clipping case blue here. Unlike Kharkov battles, which had those super extra double thick counters, these are only the thick counters. So these fit no problem in the clipper. John Friesen, thanks for stopping by. Matt Davidson, it wasn't my choice. I would have chosen Breakout Normandy actually, but the it's I was keeping my eye on a couple of things and like, oh, there it is. There's Storm over Arnhem, and it's not like I'm not interested in that. So Dan Noodles man is here. Thanks, Dan, for stopping by. We were just talking about you as usual. Everybody stop talking about Dan. So the the slap dealt to Dan last week on that show. If you haven't watched that show, I highly recommend it. The slap was felt in across the Arctic Ocean in Russia. So it really must be seen to be believed. And I got to clip that, and I've just been too lazy to do that. It's not lazy in this case. It's just that I'm not really feeling great. So we are, you know, we'll get it done sooner or later if I don't forget to pick it. To pick that task up. Jeff Beeler, thank you very much for the super chat. Much appreciated, and also much appreciate your amazing suggestion of Pandemic Rome. Certainly, the folks at Gamma would approve. Um, so, so in curating this list, right? There are also some series that I felt were like too small or too sort of controlled in terms of presentation to make me saying pick this one up first particularly meaningful. One of those games is Combat Commander. It really doesn't matter which Combat Commander game you pick up. You pick up Europe, you pick up Pacific. Mediterranean is currently not a standalone, to the best of my recollection. So there's really only those two choices. So I wasn't gonna like waste a slide, put a slide together for that information. So I'm just telling you, pick whichever Combat Commander game that interests you the most and stick with that. And then get whatever else you want. So a lot of factors kind of go into the calculus of figuring out what is the best introductory game in a given series. How easy are the rules to comprehend? How accessible is that whole package? Are the play aids good? Is there good replay value is actually a factor. There's a couple things that I left off because I didn't think that um, there was enough there. You'd play it once, maybe twice, and then be like, yeah, okay, I'm not sure I want to continue with this or whatever, right? Then you'd have to move on. Now, in every case, I've come up with a series entry that's the runner up that doesn't meet some of those criteria, and also in every case, I have some recommendations for what not to start with, and I'll be sure to point out in those circumstances when I, in fact, ignored my own advice and started with the game that you shouldn't start with. And I think for folks who've been hanging around along for a while, then I think you'll know where that's going. Um, how hard it is to get was also a factor, right? If it's some monstrously expensive out of print game or even a monstrously expensive in print game, then I tended to deprioritize that, and that may be in at least one case the big reason for my statement that says don't start with this one. Nevertheless, in some cases, some of these games are, some of the series are games that are expensive, right? So it's not like every intro game that I'm going to provide here is going to be $30 or something like that. That is not going to end up being the case. So John Stanley asks about the Fleet series. I presume you mean the Victory Games Joe Balkowski Fleet series, a very well-regarded series that I have zero experience with. So I don't necessarily have an opinion on that. John C. had asked about GMT's Next War series, and I didn't feel like I was comfortable enough with that to make a slide for that either. As was mentioned in the chat, the traditional starting place is India, Pakistan, which is out of print right now. However, the thing with the Next War series, we're talking the GMT Next War series, if I didn't say that, is that um, you should really probably pick something based on your interest in that particular topic because all of those games feature a basic game, which is relatively easy, and an advanced game, which is quite complicated. So you can really start with any of those games, and that's a little bit of a cheat. And I will say that I think Next war, Poland is probably the most complicated one. Um, so in I have tried to ignore topic here because I can't tell you what topics you're interested in, right? And that is going to be a consideration, right? If you see, my choice for, oh, don't start with this, which is going to be the case in at least one of these examples. And that's the topic that the series has covered that you're really pumped about. Well, maybe you got to start with that anyway, right? So you're not totally doomed if you don't start with one of my recommendations. I'm just some rando on the internet after all. So anyway, so I am not 100% sure that my schedule conflict is going to materialize as expected. So it is possible, not super duper likely, but it is possible that I may end up day tripping out to WBC for a day. We'll see if that actually happens. As usual, we are playing Last Blitzkrieg still. That's we are on June. December. Why do I always want to say June? December 24th, I believe. That's going well. Allies are starting to make a lot of trouble for the Germans. That over and above the trouble that the Germans have already made for themselves. Nevertheless, I didn't feel like the last day, so turn was went badly at all for me. We are still prepping La Bataille in Mount St. Jean for Buckeye Game Fest in a couple of weeks. And we are also prepping Third World War for Origins. 3D printing news. Once again, do not want to soak up the whole show with this stuff. We have released new 3D printing, 3D printable models for patrons at the swordsman and up level. So if you're interested in, right now it's counter trays. There is a dice tower model on there. There's some a couple other minor accessories on there that I will gradually expand. It is my commitment to the folks that are patrons at the swordsman level and above that I will continue to release new models every month. But in an example, I'm unwilling to release a model that I have not at least printed a prototype of because I have had to print. I am now double printing my third commands and colors tray because the first models did not work out. So, I want to make sure that they actually work before I release them. So we'll release some more stuff in May as well. And we also have the guide, which is the kind of comprehensive explanation of how you're supposed to use these things and what all the sizes are in millimeters and all that stuff. So, um, Paul West, welcome to the stream. I have not asked about this. I know that they are working on bringing this back into print in a combined edition, but I don't know what the timetable is. They're pretty busy over there at Compass Games, as you can expect. So, mm. And if you're super duper interested in 3D printing, not that I'm incredibly active over there, I am kind of doing 3D printing stuff on TikTok. So that's kind of what the use I found for TikTok. So if you want to, I think there's a link in the video description if you really want to follow me there. And it's a lot of noob tips and stuff like that. Go ahead and follow me over on TikTok. So anyway, um, the last consideration is like, is there like a logical like progression through the series, right? Does that game kind of lead you into the series in some sense? So in a series that's a looser series, like say the Civinich ZoC Bond games, that thread is maybe not quite so direct. But we're not going to talk about what should your second game in the series be. That is beyond the scope of this show tonight. So now, Livian Campaign is another one that I didn't put in this list, in part because it's so new, right? There's only 3 games out. There's a fourth one coming pretty soon, but there's only 3 games out right now. And again, I don't have a strong opinion that you should start with one or the other. I think you should pretty much, at least at this point, let your interest in the topic guide your choice there. None of the 3 are like tremendously simpler than the others. None of the 3 are tremendously more complicated than the others. So if you're really into, Italian stuff in the Renaissance, go ahead and grab Inferno. So anyway, now coin will be on the list though, because coin's been around for a while. There are excellent choices. All right, let's pull up the slideshow. That's the slideshow. We're gonna start with. That wasn't where we were. Shit, are we doing this wrong? Let me just check and make sure that this is working correctly. All right. We're supposed to start here with BCS, the Battalion Combat Series. Let me pull the frame down actually, because it's kind of in the way. I didn't plan on that. Or can I pull this? Can I pull this over? That works. Okay, cool. Cool. John C., thank you so much. Much appreciated. Compass Podcast taking a break till April 20th. Never take a day off. I have, in fact, missed a couple of these. So I apologize for those things, but those were like, situations beyond my control. Columbus is Columbus. Compass, they got a lot going on, right? And they said they were going to scale back that show, and I didn't really notice that they scaled back that show, to be completely honest. So, John, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Trying to sort these by unit code, whatever that's called for now, the efficiency value of the code. So we're going to start with the Battalion Combat Series, and this is a pretty easy one, right? The logical place to start here is with Ericore. It is the smallest game in the series. It is the newest game in the series. It contains, as do the last, at least the last one, and maybe the last two games, include the most recent set of rules and player aids. And it is ideally positioned to be an introductory game to the Battalion Combat Series, and it's got all the support material, like that support book and stuff like that, in it as well. It's also got enlarged counters and enlarged hexes, so that it's a little friendlier than the other games in the series that might have half-inch counters and regular-sized hexes. So the I did not have any. John Stanley, I am really quite paranoid about this now. I got to tell you, but no, we have technically that's not true. Actually, we did have a tree fall, but it was in the neighbor's. It was the neighbor's tree, but it fell on the fence that's between the properties. And it was, if I had let it just sit there, it would have crushed that fence. So I am going. I should say, bust out the chainsaw and knocked it down all the rest of the way. So that it would not continue to do that. There is an enormous amount of wood debris cleanup to be done. And I actually have started on that, but my willingness to stand out in the friggin' rain to do it is really limited too. Ericore, yeah, well, that's how it's more or less how it's pronounced, right? I'm not going to try to position myself as ideally expert on French pronunciation by any means, but I do make something of an effort to try to say things more or less correctly, right? So anyway, so Ericore is West Front. This is kind of the feature American division in here is the 4th Armored Division, which is a veteran division by this point. Against it are the new German Panzer Brigades with the Panthers that historically did not perform well, and which you'll find in the game. You have a tough time going up. They got really good tanks, but the crews are fairly green, and the Americans have tanks that aren't as good. They've got Shermans after all, but they've got crack crews that know what they're doing, and they just figured out very quickly, we just have to shoot the Panthers from this side. So yeah, I wish I was on steroids right now. I love steroids. Steroids are fantastic. This is not an endorsement from steroids, but they just make you feel great. What can I say? Anyway, don't start with last Blitzkrieg on this one. It is, and I guess let me talk about Brazen Chariots first. Brazen Chariots is a really nice package. As I recall, it still had the old rules in it. I believe that's correct. So the last edition of the rules, and you really do want to be playing with the current edition of the rules on this. However, it's not the original edition of the rules either. There have been, over the course of, I think, the 3 or 4 different versions of the BCS rules, some terminology changes that can create confusion if you're not aware that there was a terminology change. So, for example, there was something called defensible terrain in last Blitzkrieg, and I believe in Baptism by Fire as well. Now, this is not terrain, right? That gives you the bonus on the attack roll, the defensive bonus on the attack roll. This is defensible terrain. So basically, cities and across major rivers and whatever other game specific things there are, and it's called defensible terrain on the last Blitzkrieg player aids. It is now called key terrain. That is a clearer piece of terminology. Um, so it is. Where'd the A's go? Oh, I got the A's in there. So there's been some terminology cleanup. There's been some rules cleanup. I think there's still some room to improve the rule book. I don't at this point feel like there's much need for the game to be the game system to be updated. John Launcher says BCS is way too complicated for him, but he did buy Brazen Chariots. It's a great game. It's also a great package because it's got a lot in it. I mean, there are scenarios, including some quite small scenarios, and a campaign game in AeroCore. But Brazen Chariots is a really full, well-rounded scenario package, right? You've got Operation Brevity, you've got Operation Battle Axe, Brevity, right? I think it's about Brevity. You've got Operation Crusader, which is kind of the centerpiece of the whole thing. There are big scenarios and small scenarios and smaller versions of the campaign and the big version of the campaign. And there are some features of BCS that you'll really get to see in Brazen Chariots because it's in a desert, which is mostly open, as opposed to in Last Blitzkrieg, where you basically are fighting over a great deal of shitty terrain. Last Blitzkrieg, on the other hand, is very large. There's a lot of formations in it. There are scenarios in it. And in a way, it's kind of the purest expression of BCS because it's the game that the system was designed around. But at the same time, it is, I think, the most difficult of the whole series to play. You've also got to go, go round yourself up a new copy of the rule book, new copy of the player aids, and the new player aids are considerably better organized than the old player aids as well. I'm screwing this up. I got another tray over here. Yes. This way I can put the B's in a tray and the A's in a tray. Anyway. So great series, highly recommended over here to at least give it a shot. You might like it and you might not. One of the things that it appeals to me is that it actually does cover a lot of the same concepts and features that OCS does with a fraction of the logistical overhead, right? It's all kind of rolled into that one roll. Jeff Taylor says that from Brazen Chariots, he found that you have to use the formation movement objectives for it to play well. So the movement objectives, I believe, are optional. Nevertheless, that's not an optional rule I would have any objection to playing with. And there's, in fact, a couple of optional rules in BCS that I think might be a good idea. The orders mechanic, however, I see no sense in. I feel like that's already built into the game. So I am Andrew Atkin, really big on operational level games. Operational is my favorite scale, and I don't think it's particularly close. So I can't pause. Sorry, we gotta get the show going. We're almost half an hour in, and we're only on slide 1 yet. So let's move on to slide 2. This is another pretty easy choice, and there's a big caveat here, which is that it doesn't really matter too much what game you start, commands and colors game you start with. They're all pretty easy. So you let your interest in the subject be the guide here for the most part. Nevertheless, it's a series I'm looking at again right now because I'm trying to organize it, and there's no way I'm getting it all into boxes, but I'll at least take up a lot less space than I've been taking up. The easiest game in the series that I've played, and I haven't played them all, but I have played all 3 of these, is Commands and Colors Ancients. It's very straightforward. It has a lot of great Ancients flavor. If you're interested in the topic, I also feel like Commands and Colors is in a sense, at least for a certain type of target, prospective wargamer, maybe the ideal starter wargame. Because you're not going to get them hung up on unit sizes or any of that stuff, right? The whole scale thing is pretty well abstracted out. You're going to get a sense of the individual battle, but you're not going to get any really into the weeds on any particular individual battle. And in fact, some battles are just not battles that are good at Commands and Colors, just not good at simulating them. Obvious example would be from Commands and Colors Napoleonics, which would be Leipzig. That's way too spread out. There's like a bunch of little components of the battle, and I'm aware that there are scenarios for components of the battle, but because of the way that battle is is topologically arranged, there's just no way to do that battle in that system without making huge changes that I think defeat the whole purpose of playing it. Now, I my personal favorite game in the series is Napoleonics, but it is a little more complicated, and again, there's no quantum leap in complexity between any of the Commands and Color games. So don't hesitate, particularly if you think that will be interesting to you, to getting into whichever one. But Commands and Colors Ancients is the easiest one. And the main box set has Romans versus Carthaginians, so it's a topic that people know. Unlike, say, Commands and Colors Medieval, which is like Byzantine battles that are all relatively obscure. The runner-up here is Commands and Colors Tricorn, which I've been looking at lately in my quest to organize all the Commands and Colors stuff. And I've actually got the first two trays designed for Tricorn as well. And it's American Revolution. There is an expansion for the French, which is more American Revolution. And then there is a standalone box set for the Jacobite Rebellion, which I also have. But it's also quite easy if you are into, broadly tactical-ish American Revolution. It is a pretty nice game system. This rule is, in fact, one of the reasons why I like Napoleonics the best. But it does add a little bit of overhead. I don't think a lot, but a little bit. The one I recommend not getting into is Memoir 44, and in this particular case, that has it's on the more complicated side for the series, but it's not a like monumentally more complicated. I'm saying that because I have had a shitty time every time I've tried to play Memoir 44. And I'm not sure that's not just scenarios, problems with the scenarios, but in any case, I have had a negative experience the two or three times that I've played Memoir 44. I think it's two times, and I probably three times is probably the limit if I still think it sucks after, and it doesn't suck. I just did not have fun playing it. It's also kind of hard to find, but then again, Commands Colors Napoleonics is out of print right now as well. So, do I consider PSC's Great War as part of the broader Commands and Color series? Ray Garby. Thanks for the question, Ray. I don't think so, actually. But it may be that I'm just not familiar enough with it. Oh, wait. No, I would consider that. If that's the game I'm thinking of, I would absolutely consider that. This is the Richard Borg. Some games have miniatures, some of them have blocks. Doesn't really matter. But just because it's not from GMT, Tricorn's not from GMT either. So if we're talking about that Commands and Colors, the Great War thing, yeah, I would absolutely consider that as part of this series. We're getting into Class C units here, but I also haven't played that. In addition, I have concerns about how fun that might be. It might be fabulous for all I know. But the fact is that like basically tactical World War I, man, that's a tough sell. That's a really tough sell. So Steve Parker, thanks for stopping by. We have shout out to Steve, by the way, and to Ray. I'm not sure which Ray off the top of my head, but there was a Ray that's a new patron. They're shouted out in the ticker, and Steve is also a new patron at the hero level. So thanks, Ray and Steve. Steve says that the old SPI quad game Battle of Nations was a good intro game, works well with three players. Yes, but that doesn't have the sort of the artificial limitation of there must be a left, there must be a center, and there must be a right. Right? That Leipzig in particular does not comport itself well to that arrangement. The SPI Quad Battle of Nations game is a good game, and in fact, that's out of Napoleon at War, not out of Napoleon's Last Battles. Now, we did do a show on the SPI Quads, so I will direct folks to that for those who are interested in some commentary, informed or not, about the contents of the various quad games, and including my stupid omission of Art of Siege. So, Red Alert is the sci-fi version. Now, I haven't played that. I would be shocked if that's not a lot of fun, to be honest. I think that system is Carl, I think you might be mixing this up with Commands and Combat Commander, because the game called Great War Commander is the game from Hexasim in the Combat Commander series. I think you're thinking of the Great War, and there may have been a commander in there too. But when I hear Great War Commander, it's the Hexasim series that I'm thinking of. So, and I think Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials is alluding to this too. Um, And the original CNC Samurai battles from Zvezda, I believe, was a Richard Borg design as well. In fact, I think they're all Richard Borg designs as far as I'm aware. I'm not aware that it's been done by anybody else. So, and Carl corrects himself. He does mean Great War Commander from Combat Commander. I'm doing it too now. I've actually already done it at least twice on this show already. I am not at my sharpest this evening. This way, I have prepared excellent slides for you all, so you can drone off as I drone here. So Patty Rafesky clarifies there. Yes, they're all Borg, and that was my recollection. But like I said, I haven't played them all. I certainly haven't owned them all. I've played these three that you see here, plus Napoleonics, plus Medieval, and they're all good. My concerns with Memoir 44 aside, which Memoir 44 just wasn't really working for me. Now, let me actually go back to that, because I will point out, this is kind of a big caveat, and this might make a big difference, that every time I've tried to play Memoir 44, it has been like one of these huge Mondo games. So if you with 8 players per, 4 players or 8 players or whatever it is per side. So if you don't do that, you may end up with a completely different experience. So let me, just clarify that. So maybe if I do try it again and it is not high on the list, um, I will probably try to make a point to not play one of the huge scenarios and play one of the smaller scenarios instead. That said, I do also feel like World War II is not as good a fit for the system as really anything else that has been done by the system. So, get that out of the way. Coin. The obvious choice here, I think, is Cuba Libre. Cuba Libre is, which I've played. I haven't played the runner up, but I've played the other two. There is a reasonably significant variation in complexity between coin games. Okay. That complexity is sometimes in the rules, it's sometimes in the cards, and it's sometimes on the map. In particular, Cuba Libre has a very, very straightforward map without a lot of spaces, without a lot of weird extra features like terrain. There are terrain types, but they don't have a huge impact. There's only, I think, 2, maybe 3 different terrain types. There's no lines of communication or any of that. So you really have a pretty streamlined coin experience if you play Cuba Libre. And one of the factions is the Mafia, which is obviously the most fun to play. Even if you are not interested in, I will. So somebody right now is thinking, I'm just not interested in that topically, and I'm gonna maybe change your mind by telling you to remember Godfather Part 2. And I think I don't need to say any more about that. So there's that. Pendragon is another one that would, I think, not be a great start. The runner up here is the newly released The British Way. This is the coin multi-pack. This is 4 small coin games that you can also, if you want, combine them and play them all together in a big campaign. Well, not a big campaign, but a campaign, right? So if you have so not only does that give you these kind of 4 very digestible coin games on the topic of the collapse of British colonialism, but it gives you, they're different games, right? It's a quad. You'll have a very different experience playing each of those games, and there's a campaign to keep you busy. So I think there's a lot to explore in that set. I think that set is like a really good value. I don't have it, but I think that it is a very nice package for those interested in that topic. And the upcoming, I'm guessing 2025, Guerrilla Generation is going to be the same type of deal, right? Although I don't know if there's going to be a campaign, because I think a campaign makes a lot more sense for the British Way than it does a bunch of not especially linked guerrilla fighters, but I could see a mechanism by which that could be done too. So I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just a little less transparent. John C mentions that everybody in the Philippines is waiting for people power. I'm guessing that's absolutely right. I can totally see why. There should be actually. Um, so in this case, I think the British way is the runner up and not the primary choice because I haven't played it, obviously, because it literally just came out. Um, So now the one to not start with here, I think, is Fire in the Lake. There are another couple coin games and somebody mentioned Pendragon. And I would also not recommend starting with Pendragon. Pendragon and Fire in the Lake. Again, I haven't played them all, but I played a decent number of them. Uh, Pendragon and Fire in the Lake are the two most complicated, in my opinion. Um, there's a lot going on in Fire in the Lake and in Pendragon too, and you really have to kind of get it to not completely shit your pants in that game. So I would highly recommend both games. Actually, both of them are among my favorite coin games, but they are not ideal games to start with. Now, again, if there's a specific topic, there's people that are starting. Somebody's starting right now and talking about it on Twitter with a distant plane. And that's not necessarily the one I would start with either. I don't think it's the easiest to deal with, but it's certainly not the hardest to deal with. So, all right, let's get some water here because we're still a little froggy. All right, next up is the Der Weltkrieg series. Now, these are four identical looking volumes. Okay, at this point, there was kind of an earlier generation of Der Weltkrieg games that the current generation of Der Weltkrieg games combines and consolidates, and that's never more true than in the Eastern Front box. Now, I am not 100% sure what the actual status of SPW is as an ongoing concern at this point. However, you can still get this stuff from Decision Games. They are, however, not Decision Games games. Decision had nothing to do with the development of these things, the design or development. They were all designed by SPW, and not by anybody at Decision. Decision was just kind of the handling the retailing or distribution end of it at one point. And again, I'm not sure what happened to SPW, but their website doesn't exist anymore, so I'm not sure what's up with that. Alistair Logie says that these are not attractive covers. I wouldn't call them attractive, nor would I call them exceptionally hideous. They are certainly distinctive. They are very utilitarian. I can live with that. But if you were to put these on a game store shelf, I don't know that they're eye catching in the sense of they're a very brassy color. But that's it. They're otherwise fairly unattractive collages of pictures. So I'm not going to defend the covers. The system itself, however, is very good. I think at its scale, it's one of the best World War One series. The other I could think of would be the 1914 Mike Resch series from GMT, of which I guess I'll say the obvious one to start with there is Serbian Moose Sterbian, but that's also a topic that not a lot of people are interested in, apparently. I'm actually interested in that as a topic. I think that's an excellent topic that hasn't been covered very much. All A's. So now there used to be a Tannenberg volume, and now there is a Tannenberg sort of folio pack that's a starter game that's just Tannenberg. The original Tannenberg boxed game had a little more stuff. The attractive thing about the Eastern Front package is it's basically like 4 or 5 games in one, right? It's not horrendously expensive for what it is. You get a lot of content. You can play out basically the entire East Front of World War One the whole time. And although to get the most out of that, you do want the campaign games. You can do like the Russian Civil War and stuff like that. Not really the Civil War, but the Russian Empire collapse. So we put it that way. But There's nevertheless a lot of meat there, and because it's all individual games kind of stitched together, you can just play, Tannenberg, you can just play Galicia, you can just play Serbia, you can do all kinds of different things with it. So it's a great value package, in addition to containing just a lot of physically a lot of stuff. So that's the reason why I say go with Eastern Front. And it does include Tannenberg too. There's just a bunch of other stuff in there. Tannenberg only gives you like the one counter sheet that you need for Tannenberg, where Eastern Front gives you all the stuff. So unless it is the price that is making the decision for you, I would go with Eastern Front. And if the price is making the decision for you, go with Tannenberg. And I do think that you'll be able to get a couple of plays out of Tannenberg, and you'll probably want more. Now, it is a fairly fiddly system, but it's not complicated particularly. I say fiddly in the sense of movement is very intricate because of terrain and the way the rail move mechanic works. So you will, those who really like um, the way movement works in OCS, which I do, I think we'll like the way movement works in Der Weltkrieg. You've also got the hex side terrain that some people like are literally made nauseous by. But and I will mention, as William Ahrens points out, my confidence in spelling that channel name is pretty low, but that is Christopher Prest. He has been covering Der Weltkrieg exhaustively for a long time. Um, I can't tell you this Abraxas MF because I have all of the current ones. I will tell you that the counters are also fairly utilitarian. There's nothing really fancy going on those counters. The counter stock and the ones I have is adequately thick. If you've got one of the older ones, I'm not sure what the stock quality was like. Alan Salazar says he likes the system, but I'm not a fan of the maps. We found that over the course of the Tannenberg game, you got used to the maps. They are weird at first. All right. Yes, and as Perfidious Albion, the mechanics are quite straightforward. The complexity of it emerges out of the game system, which is something that I think is a really, really positive trait in a game myself. All right. So don't start with the Western Front. In this case, don't start with the Western Front because it's boring. You're going to get a couple of active months out of the West Front, but after that, if the game isn't over, you're going to be in for a 4-year trench warfare slog. You're not going to have much movement. I think that the West Front game is probably the last game you should buy. Now, there is a Schlieffen Plan scenario. It was originally released as a separate volume called the Schlieffen Plan, and that's the mobile first 3 months of the war. So you can actually get a good game out of that. But after that, it's going to be quite a slog, and I do not foresee many people having fun with that. There's folks who temperamentally probably would enjoy it, but I guess I'm not one of those people, and I think those people are in the minority. So moving along. Europa. I get asked this all the time too. I try to always say, I don't actually recommend that you get into Europa. For a number of reasons. One is that it is an outrageously outdated game system. There is no question about that. It is a game system dating from the early 1970s, and you can absolutely tell. It has components that do not measure up well by today's standards, but that's not by itself not a big deal. But that game system is quite bloated and very clumsy in a number of places. It is not, however, actually broken, because you end up getting good results out of it. Now, whether you decide that the good results you got at the end of playing it for a year and a half are worth the hassle of playing it for a year and a half, that is up to you. The selling point of Europa is that, in part because it is frankly a misscaled series. It has a unit scale that doesn't match the turn scale, that doesn't match the map scale. In part for that reason, there's really nothing else quite like it. All right, we are going to need to dump counters in the tray because we are done with the Germans. So there's a full counter sheet and a half of Soviets. So this is a great and particular and completely legitimate question. Well, what the hell are you playing it for then? So there's a couple of reasons. One is that, to be honest, when we play Europa and I complain incessantly the entire time, but at the end of it, I have to admit to myself that despite all of the clumsiness and outdated mechanics and all of that, that it is a satisfying experience at the end. That is in part because of the people I'm playing it with, to be honest. So it's not just you go to a convention and play Europa with randos. I in no sense promise you a good experience out of that. But it's a unique game system too, right? That whole thing with the the orders of battle, meticulously researched orders of battle to a literal fault. That game disappears into its order of battle, which is overdone, because they felt like, well, this battalion did something, so we have to have a counter for it. No, you don't. You do not need a counter for that battalion. And again, that's kind of contributed to the game system's issues with its scale. Now, that said, after I've explained all that, the same person probably says, well, yeah, but what should I start with? Okay, so my recommendation on this, now there is a game called Case White, which was intended explicitly as a Europa starter game. There's also a revision of Case White called First to Fight. Now, this is the 1939 campaign in Poland, which is a more interesting campaign than you may have been led to believe, by the way. So there's that. However, the Case White, and I think First to Fight might as well, does really weird things with scale in a game system that already has issues with scale. So for that reason, I'd recommend avoiding Case White or First to Fight. And I would recommend instead, either, it doesn't really matter, either Marina Mercure or Balkan Front. Balkan Front is the GRD newer edition of Marina Mercure that includes some additional stuff. Jeff Beeler, thanks very much. It is a bit sandboxy. That is absolutely true. What the hell is this? Black Sea Transport. Okay. It's not sandboxy in the same sense that like World in Flames is, though. So if I don't want to give folks that kind of impression, but you do, within the context of the campaign that the game you're playing simulates, you do have the flexibility to try different stuff. Would you bear in mind that you might be playing for a year and a half or not if your strategy catastrophically fails? So now our Europa is also an influence, a noticeable influence in OCS. I think this statement is a little strong on John's part, but I see where he's coming from, and this is actually mentioned in the OCS rulebook. David Thompson, thanks for stopping by. Always good to see you. So Marina Mercure is Operation Marina and Operation Mercure. It's the campaign for the Balkans. We found that this is a really quite nice sort of operational puzzle in a good way. It's small, but really not that small. It's not like you're going to play it in an evening, but you could play it in a weekend, I think, of constant play. Marina Mercure is 2 maps. They're a little undersized maps, as I recall. So that is not a monster. Balkan Front, which unfortunately, I see what they were trying to do with these covers at GRD, but everybody, I frequently see this listed on eBay as a game called Gladio. This is a period recruitment poster, and it's cool, but it screws up the branding. So bad branding on GRD's part, but presumably that didn't matter because everybody that was buying it knew what they were getting in the first place. War in the Desert, unfortunately, is friggin' expensive. Plan on paying $200 to $300 for a copy of War in the Desert, whereas a copy of Marina Mercure or Balkan Front you can frequently get for $50 or less, and that is a factor. Okay, in this and in some of the other cases as well, but in this particular case, the full game, no, it's not 8 pool tables. It might be. I wonder if you could get it on 2 ping pong tables. That's not far off. I can tell you that, but there's no reasonable table configuration to set the entire map up and actually be able to reach the middle. War in the Desert is the GRD revision of Western Desert, the Near East, and Torch. The Near East is kind of an add-on, although I think there is an Operation Exporter scenario in it. But and I'm quite certain there is in War in the Desert. But I wouldn't recommend getting the Near East or Spain and Portugal on their own. But Torch and Western Desert are both good, actually, starters. Narvik, I think, is as well. But Narvis another one of those that, to the best of my recollection, does another couple of weird things with the time scale, and I don't think that necessarily to good effect, and I think that will create confusion. Lee Hanna says Western Desert is better than War in the Desert. It's certainly a more digestible package, and that is why Western Desert is our runner-up, because it is a good North Africa game. It is relatively low density. It plays quite quickly. It is one map. It might also be two maps, but again, they're slightly undersized maps by modern standards, so it's not an unreasonable footprint. And you can absolutely play it without off-map boxes to hold cores and stuff like that. So Lee says that Narvik is a radically different game, not really part of the series. I had Narvik back in the day. I have it now sort of as part of Storm over Scandinavia, which sort of does it both ways, I believe. Um, so that's a reason why I didn't put um, Narvik in. Scale wise, in terms of like piece count and map footprint and all that, it looks good, but it's one of those things where it's significantly different from the rest of the series. And if you want to experience the series, I recommend avoiding it, at least at first. The don't start with here is Second Front for a couple of reasons. One, it's enormous. Um, two, it is enormously expensive. And three, it's the entire Western Front of World War II. So it goes from, now we played the whole thing, and it was a rewarding experience. It took a long time. Um, Second Front covers from Operation Husky in July of 1943 all the way to the end of the war. Okay. So as you can imagine, with four major amphibious invasions happening in that time frame historically, that the naval and amphibious rules are going to be important. And the naval and amphibious rules are a part of Europa that notoriously does not work well. I mean, I would argue that much of the game doesn't work well, but I would also argue that in the main, that the naval and amphibious rules are actually broken, and that's why they kept fiddling with them over time. Um, uh, Second Front is also where the bloated Europa air system is at its absolute worst. The number of air counters that you are going to have on the map and have to manage and fight and roll on is absolutely obscene. That said, we've played it. We played once from beginning to end and once at Origins last year, and I had a good time with it. So I do not make any, contention that that is logical or anything like that. I miss GDW too, for a number of reasons, but Europa's maybe not one of them. Remember that Europa got sold and shipped out to GRD before the fall of GDW. So the GDW folks had lost interest in it well before that. Lee says that Storm over Scandinavia has both Narvik and normal Europa scenarios in the region. Somebody also mentioned how expensive Scorched Earth was. It is absolutely very expensive. It's not the most expensive game I've ever bought. That would be Second Front. I paid more for Second Front than I did for Scorched Earth, but it took me like 2 or 3 years of lurking to try to find an unpunched copy of Scorched Earth at a price I wanted to pay, a high price that I was willing to pay. And when I got it, I found that 2 of the counter sheets were irreparably misregistered. Now I was able to fix that situation. I bought one counter sheet from somebody on eBay for $20, just the counter sheet. And I managed to get the other 2 counter sheets that I was missing. I should say there were 2 bad counter sheets in Scorched Earth, and there was 1 bad counter sheet in Their Finest Hour. And the other two, including the one for their finest hour and the remaining one from Scorched Earth, I managed to get off a person on the Europa Facebook group, which is a terrific group. There's a terrific Facebook group for Europa. Um, Nevertheless, right, I'm not telling anybody go out and buy Europa games. That is not my recommendation. Play something newer. It will play a lot cleaner. You will have a potentially good experience, and there are, god damn this thing, there are plenty of good East Front games. Play OCS, play East Front Series. There's all kind of stuff to do, um, but none of them are at quite the scale of Europa, right? So, all right, next up is this is going to be a 2-volume uh, discussion here, because I feel like at this point that there are really 2 series called Great Battles of the American Civil War, and there's sort of a nebulous middle ground where they're more or less the old series still. So we are calling them Great Battles of the American Civil War 1, the SPI years, and really this includes TSR and 3W and Simulations Design, and GBACW Volume 2, which is the GMT years. So of the original series, I think the best one to get started with, and again, bear in mind, ease of getting it is a factor. Cedar Mountain it's a very late S&T issue. It was never done in a box, so you're stuck getting it in a magazine. But for that reason, it's relatively inexpensive. You should be able to score a copy of Cedar Mountain for somewhere between $20 and $30 unpunched. That's not to say there's not some bozo on eBay right now trying to get $150 for it. But I think it's also an interesting battle, and it gives you the ability to compare and contrast it with Cedar Mountain in the new series if you are inclined to do that. The runner-up here is Stonewall, which of the original series from SPI, I want to say it's the smallest. Now, I don't have Jackson at the Crossroads and the Battle of Corinth, so one of those two, those were issued in like a dual pack. Aside maybe from those, Stonewall is the smallest game in the series, and it also isn't quite comport itself to the rest of the series rules wise, but I don't think that's much of a big deal in this particular case. I do, generally speaking, recommend the new series over the old series, but there are folks who prefer the old series, right? Terrible Swift Sword's not going to make the recommendation list because it's big and expensive. Stonewall or Cedar Mountain, you should be able to get quite inexpensively. The one that you should not start with is Bloody April. It is considered one of the worst games in the original series. It is also big, and it is also fairly expensive, but not as expensive because it does not have a great reputation. Could be Wilson's Creek. I don't think any between Cedar Mountain, Wilson's Creek, Pea Ridge, and Drive on Washington. I don't think there's necessarily a clear favorite in there. If you have any of those already and you want to try the system, try those. That's totally, or Stonewall. Try those, and I think you'll be fine. Or keep your eye out for all of them. And I do think that Stacking Limit mentions that Wilson's Creek was unbalanced. I think that's true. Pea Ridge is a good battle, though. So that's Jackson and Corinth goes kind of high to my tastes as well. I will mention that. Steve-O says he prefers the accessible SPI GBACW series over the bloated GMT series. There are people that feel that way. I wouldn't say bloated, but it's definitely complicated and fiddly. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. If you're lucky, you can. This is true. Mandarin Mike says you can get a TSS in the flat relatively inexpensively if you don't mind it's beat up. I don't have a particular problem with a game like that being beat up. I have a bigger problem if I get it and it's missing stuff. And I don't necessarily trust a random person on eBay to be able to even tell whether it's missing stuff or not. So, I don't think TSS is the ideal entry point to this game looking back on its history. Game system. Let me put it that way. A great game though it is. And I think there's not really a doubt about that. All right. So if we talk about Great Battles of the American Civil War from GMT. I think the natural entry point at this time is Death Valley Battles for the Shenandoah. This is a big 3-inch box. It's a huge multi-pack. It's like 9 or 11 or something like that battles in it, many of which have multiple scenarios. And the battles themselves range from quite small, like quite small battles, up to quite large battles. The biggest battle, which I think is 3rd Winchester, I might be misremembering that again. Stigler will correct me though, is a fairly big 2-map battle. But there are also like other battles in that volume on like a half or quarter size maps. So it'll give you a nice platform on which to learn the game system, and yet plenty of things to do once you get comfortable with it. You can just ramp up to additional larger battles that are all in the same box. So it's yet another value laden GMT multi pack type of affair. Some of these battles also appeared in, this is generally true. Some of the battles in Death Valley also appeared in the older series. Kernstown is one of them. The game Stonewall is Battle of Kernstown, and Kernstown is found in Death Valley as well. Now, the runner-up here, and the only reason it's the runner-up is because it's not out yet, is in fact By Swords and Bayonets from our very own Stigler. That is going to be the ideal entry place for Great Battles of the American Civil War when it arrives. And we're all hoping that that will be very, very soon. But given GMT's pipeline woes, maybe it won't be all that soon. I'll be delighted if I'm wrong. It has already made its number. That's not a concern. It's just a matter of getting it through the GMT production pipeline. I'll also mention that there is an expansion for Death Valley that gives you more about like 3 more battles, each a couple of which have multiple scenarios. So good luck getting it all back in the box, folks. I fortunately have a solution to that. So whenever I get to that, we will be generating a 3D printed counter storage solution for Death Valley specifically. You'll need it. I mean, you could just baggy everything, and I guess that'd be fine, but that sucks. All right, so don't start with River of Death or 3 Days of Gettysburg. Now, those are 2 early games in the series, and I'm aware that there are 3 different editions of 3 Days of Gettysburg, and they differ significantly, by the way. It doesn't even matter. There's a lot of stuff that needed to get updated in the latest edition of 3 Days of Gettysburg that wasn't, because the series had evolved a little bit between the previous printing and the 3rd edition. So I don't recommend 3 Days of Gettysburg as a starting point. It is obviously Gettysburg. It's an attractive battle. By all means, tackle it later on, or you can wait for a new edition of it, which ought to be along at some point. Now, I have not. Alistair Logie mentions the Cube for Me trays that allow you to fit everything in the original box. Okay, I don't have that particular set. So I had ordered some Cube for Me trays, I think for GBOH games. And they came pretty quickly actually, but unfortunately they arrived shortly after I started working with the 3D printer. So they are impressive. I like them. They are sitting on a shelf unused at this time. And I may try and organize Great Battles of Alexander into them. I don't know, but I am much more likely to design, print, and release for patrons GBOH trays that are 3D printed trays. So that's not to say that the Cube for Me trays are a bad option. I think they look really good, and I mean just the fact that you're available to get that they are available in multiple sizes and configurations is an enormous help. So by all means, investigate those. They're pretty reasonably priced. The shipping is pretty reasonable, and you'd be surprised that it does not take a huge amount of time to get them to you from Poland. So, all right. So Red Badge of Courage is 1st and 2nd Manassas, and this is that really falls into the don't start with that either. And then the same thing actually applies to between River of Death, Red Badge of Courage, and actually Dead of Winter as well. There's a lot of old sort of artifacting from previous versions in those. They are not really up to snuff. I can speak specifically to the scenarios in Dead of Winter, which have some significant problems. I have every faith that Dick Whitaker and company, when time comes to revise those games, that they will do a bang up job on cleaning all that up. Those are really strong examples actually of Berg as a sloppy designer. I have many things to praise about Richard Berg as a designer, but he was sometimes quite sloppy, and those games show it. Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Mo, thanks for stopping by. Now, that said, River of Death is Chickamauga. That's, I think, one of the most interesting big Civil War battles. So it's a fabulous topic. I will also point out that there's a new Black Swan series game coming out, the follow-up to A Most Fearful Sacrifice, which will be Chickamauga. That's been announced, so I can talk about it now. I may, in fact, have gotten about a 24-hour advanced sneak peek at the cover, maybe 12 hours, but it's gonna be cool. Same scale, same system as Most Fearful Sacrifice. And it's got George Thomas on the cover, so that's even better. So Twin Peaks is actually pretty good too, but Twin Peaks is out of print, right? And availability is considered. So and in fact, Twin Peaks at one point was like on sale repeatedly at GMT, and now people are asking $150 for it. So I am very pleased with the stewardship of the GBACW system under Dick Whitaker and team. So I'll just put it that way. That's not to say I will necessarily agree with every decision that they may have made, but I think the series is in good hands with Dick at the helm. So, all right. So next up is Great Battles of History. Now, in this case, we have a parallel rule set called Simple Great Battles of History, which I am on the record as saying I don't think it's particularly simpler than the other Great Battles of History rules. So I don't really think that that's the way to go. I think you lose a lot of flavor and detail for not much gain in ease, although you do pick up some in play time because it does play faster. So that aside, my recommendation at this point, and this is again, availability is a factor, and Great Battles of Alexander Deluxe expanded should be out again pretty soon. So this is my recommendation. This is a tremendous value package. There's Jesus, I don't even know how many scenarios. In the original printing of Great Battles of Alexander, the Macedonian Art of War expanded deluxe edition, which is the thing that's pictured here. I think there were 19 battles in it. Now, not all those battles are incredibly evenly matched, okay? And they'll tell you that they're not in the scenario. But that aside, this has a really good mix of small battles. And it is the original, not original, but it's kind of the classic GBOH system in its kind of purest form, right? You don't have, any of the stuff you have with the Japanese games or the Roman games or any of that. So part of the equation here is just the value in this game. You can start with really small battles that in the time of Alexander's father, and move up to the big battles like Gaugamela and stuff like that. The runner-up here, despite having the Roman command system in it, which does add some complexity, is SPQR for a lot of the same reasons, though, because it's a tremendous value package. It's got some small battles, it's got some big battles, and the new edition of this has Barbarian in it too. So I, again, didn't count the scenarios, but it's a lot. It's 20 plus scenarios. Oh dear. That's not that embarrassing, actually. I mean, if kids mispronounce stuff, right? Okay, so a number of things here. Steve Parker says he likes the John Southard West End Chickamauga game. That's actually got a pretty good reputation. Perfidious Albion asks about an Antietam game for GBACW, and Stigler answers. Somebody answered. So Stigler says recommended to play any game with the current rules. Yes, that's totally true, but I recommend playing with the current rules too. They're significantly clearer. And Stigler also mentions the Gleam of Bayonets 2 is fairly early in development. I hope they keep that title, actually. I don't know if that's going to cause problems or not, but I think it's a good title, actually. It's a better title than Into the Woods, which makes me think of of Little Red Riding Hood. So, and I know why it's called that, but it's not a great title. James Whitmer. So my don't start with is Lion of the North for specifically this reason. So I think the original conceit of the series is that it was going to go all over the place history wise, but then the way it actually developed turned into much more of a an ancients focused, if not entirely exclusively ancients, games series. So the aspect of kind of getting into 30 Years War, for example, um, kind of began and ended with Lion of the North. So I do think you are better with musket and pike if you're interested in that topic specifically, that you are better off with musket and pike or some equivalent modern game on those topics, rather than running down Lion of the North. That said, I had everything in the series except for Lion of the North, so I had to get it. And that's another one that took years of lurking before it showed up for a price that I wanted to pay. So, Perfidious Albion says that he read through the simple GBOH rules and found the effort is not worth it, renders the mechanics too generic without the unique historical rules and behaviors of the period. I completely agree. It does add playability in terms of playtime and in terms of sort of uniformity across the different battles. But I also prefer the additional detail, flavor, and analysis that I get out of the full rules of the game. And again, I don't think that simple GBOH is that much simpler. So Brent McCabe asks, how does this GBOH compare with the CNC Ancients equivalent? So these are not abstract. So this is very much an apples and anvils type of comparison. Okay, they are very different, other than being on ancient topics. Okay, commands and colors in general, not just ancients, but we'll talk about ancients in this context, has an abstract scale. What is the scale? The game doesn't say, and the scenarios don't say, so it's kind of abstract, which is a great virtue of that system because it can do some things that otherwise might be excluded based on scale. But you also don't have a sense of the size of battles and stuff like that. You just kind of can count pieces. Commands and Colors Ancients is a card-driven game. I think it's fair to use that term. It's not like a Herman-esque card-driven game, but it is a card-driven game. It is a far simpler game than Great Battles of History. I don't think Great Battles of History is monumentally complicated, but compared to Commands and Colors, it's pretty complicated. Stigler says that South Mountain 2 has started play testing, hoping to improve on the Twin Peaks games, and several Maryland campaign battles are envisioned. Now, I mean, Twin Peaks is not that old, so I would hope that other things would get prioritized over doing South Mountain again, personally. But I'm at the same time, if they do South Mountain, I'll buy that too. Whatever. Just shut up and take my money. I'm trying to catch up on the chat here. And we're doing pretty good time wise. All right, we're going to the bottom here. All right. Oh, Sig was talking about the weird pronunciation of various Civil War battles and names. Yes, and this is all true. This is the correct pronunciation of Gettysburg is not Gettysburg; it's Gettysburg. So I do not care. So here in Ohio, we say Gettysburg. So that's the way we say it. I will try and get these sort of regional names right where possible. Broken Bro in particular is, I think you've misspelled that, by the way. Some of these are not particularly Stanton is not, I don't think, particularly unintuitive, but Tolver is definitely like, what? Huh? How's that work? I think this is a little bit Stacking Limit compares Commands and Colors Ancients to Checkers compared to GBOH. And I think that's a little flippant, but I mean, if you're really into those details, then yeah, Commands and Colors is probably not going to satisfy you in the long term. So I'll certainly agree with that. All right, next up is Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. How are we doing time-wise? We're doing fine. So this is a great series. It's an operational American Civil War series. It is, I think, the operational American Civil War series, in fact. Highly recommended. The best entry point at this time is Hood Strikes North. By and large, over the course of the life of the series, so Avalon Hill did 6 or 7 games, something like that. And of those original Avalon Hill games, they were all 2 maps except for 2. Stonewall in the Valley was 3 maps, and Stonewall's Last Battle was 1 map. Okay, and that's Chancellorsville. So 2 maps is kind of the standard loadout for a GCACW game. Now, MMP later on in its history decided they were going to start doing these omnibus volumes of multiple previous volumes in the series. And I think the first one they did like this was Stonewall Jackson's Way 2, which had the Stonewall Jackson's Way stuff, which is second Manassas, as well as All Green Alike, which is first Manassas. And then Rose to Gettysburg 2, which has Rose to Gettysburg, Here Come the Rebels, which is the Antietam campaign. And then Rebels in the White House, which is Early's raid on Washington. So those are big packages, and they are therefore fairly expensive. Hood Strikes North is I think 1 map and 2 counter sheets, if I'm not mistaken. Great entry into the series. It is not simplified in any way. It's just a fairly uncomplicated campaign to do in GCACW. And that happened, they managed to make it all fit on 1 map, which is also good. So it's an MMP game, so it's not incredibly inexpensive, but for MMP standards, it's fairly inexpensive. So highly recommended to check this series out. It is fantastic. It's been a while since I've looked at Lee versus Grant. I want to say that was 2 maps too. I could be mistaken about that. It's been quite a long time since I've looked at Lee versus Grant. That is kind of an ancestor of GCACW, though. I will agree with that statement. So all right. James Whitmer asks about On to Richmond 2. I have no particular insight on this, as in like somebody's told me something, but MMP has said that this should get released this year. It's going to be expensive, but it's going to have basically the equivalent of 3 full-size games in it. So this is hilarious. The hilarious part about this Stigler is that you might have gotten it wrong. So that's another one. Okay. I don't. Patrick may have more insight on this than I do, so I'm not gonna contradict him. If he's heard that, then I'm willing to take that as an intention. That may not be what they end up executing. Perfidious Albion says that GCCW reminds him of the Zucker Napoleonic operational series. Yeah, those series are less alike than people tend to think. I think there are virtues in both systems, and there are reasons to like the Zucker operational games, but that they are in no sense as dominating within their category as GCACW is. GCACW is the name of the game in Operational Civil War, and that's that. There are other games that have tried, but they are second, third, fourth, and fifth fiddle. The Zucker series, I think, is kind of the number one Napoleonic operational series, but it does not dominate operational Napoleonics like that. And there are a decent number of independent, standalone Napoleonic operational games that I think also have some valuable things to say. All right. This is absolutely true too. Hood was the poster boy for competent brigadier and division commander promoted above his competence level. Absolutely right. And that's a thing that, say, Victory Game Civil War shows very well, actually. So, this is also true. I don't know that I'd use the word scalable to describe this, but there is an optional fog of war system with force markers, and in a, like, not for a noob, I wouldn't use the force markers if you're new at it. But I would use the force markers if you're playing with experienced players. It gives cavalry an additional thing they can do as well. They're actually, I mean, one of the cool things about the system is cavalry get used the way cavalry actually got used in the American Civil War, and not like they got used in the Napoleonic Wars. So they are different. So the runner up here is, despite the expense, Roads to Gettysburg 2, because it is such a tremendous package. Like all GC ACW games, amazed I'm only done that once. There are a wide variety of scenarios, basic scenarios and advanced scenarios. And unlike some systems, I feel like the short scenarios, maybe not the super short scenarios, but the mid, we'll call it mid-length scenarios to short campaigns, I think are really, really good in GCACW and worth playing. And Rose to Gettysburg 2 has a crap ton of those. Plus, they're Gettysburg and Antietam, so they're topics that people are familiar with. I'd say not, to answer that question. HUN644, thanks for stopping by. Much appreciated. All right. Don't start with Atlanta is ours. So Atlanta is ours is what it sounds like. It's Sherman's campaign to take Atlanta. And let's get some water. It's a really good game. However, the campaign rules have been a bit divisive, to the point where the most recent edition of the Skirmisher was actually pretty much dedicated to giving you a completely different campaign advanced game. So your mileage may vary on that. I don't think there's really much wrong with the advanced game out of the box. But there is kind of a lot going on in that advanced game. So that gets my recommendation for maybe don't start with that one for that reason. It's also late war, so there's some additional considerations that aren't really a factor through 1862 and 1863. So things like trench lines and stuff like that. So things like long lulls in the course of the campaign game. So I would recommend by all means, if you get into the series, grab Atlanta is ours, and I believe it's still available. I believe Rose to Gettysburg 2 might not be. But that gets my recommendation to not start with it for that reason. Next up is GOSS. People have been asking me about this because they know we played it at Winterfest. So this was a bit of a tough choice, right? On the one hand, you have Hanut, Tank France, whatever it is. It's called Tank Battle in France or something like that, even though it wasn't in France. It was in Belgium in 1940. And it's a nice introduction to the system. But it's out of print, and it has some what we'll call development issues, and it will not teach you the full game system. It will teach you a very truncated version of the game system. So my recommendation is, despite what it costs, and it is still in print, is to pick up, if you're interested in GOSS and want to give it a shot, is to pick up Lucky Forward. None of the GOSS games, with the exception of Wacht am Rhein, and this is kind of not true of Wacht am Rhein, these are not games that have as one of their virtues a really great scenario selection. I have frequently noted, for example, that the scenario selection in Atlantic Wall sucks. Lucky Forward is a little bit better in that it gives you a couple of smaller scenarios to practice on. But the big deal here is that it gives you the new rules and the new charts, and that makes a huge difference in ease of learning and playing the game system. The big stickler here is, in fact, the charts, because while you can download the rule book from Decision Games, you cannot download the charts. They are not in the Vassal module. And while they sold them as like a standalone charts pack for a while, and I'd have been happy to buy a standalone charts pack, unfortunately, that's out of print. So you can't get those anymore without buying Lucky Forward. And that's kind of lame. If they're not going to keep that in print, then they should just put them out on to be able to download them. You still need the maps and the pieces. No sane person is going to build themselves a print and play copy of a friggin' GOSS game. So, or even on Vassal. And the Vassal modules are generally pretty good, except for Wacht am Rhein, which never got updated. But Jeff Peeler says the best GOSS intro game will be the next GOSS S&T game. I forget what that is. I think they have made that announcement. That was a big hit. That sold out for them relatively quickly. So I do think we'll see more of those mini GOSS games, and I'm all for that. But one nice thing about Hanut is that it gives you all the counters that you need to play with the full GOSS rules. And I rather like that. And Lucky Forward is expensive. These games are all expensive, caveat emptor. So it is huge. So I mean, it's not like you're not getting a lot of stuff. But if you've watched my unboxing video, you'll know that you only get one copy of the player aids in that game. And I felt like for what that cost, that's fairly lame. I gotta tell you. So anyway, don't start. So the runner-up is Hanut, just because it's small. It's out of print. That's actually going for like $75 or $100 now, is what I'm seeing. You can absolutely learn on Hanut, and it's not a bad way to go. And it's certainly, even at $75 to $100, it is certainly not the $200 that Lucky Forward costs. So it's not a bad plan, and that is why it is the runner-up. The don't start with is Atlantic Wall. Atlantic Wall has a disastrously bad scenario selection. You do need the updated rules and what they call the scenario rules, meaning the playbook / game specific rules, because the original printing of that is a disaster. The that setup is riddled with huge problems. I would go so far as to say that it's nearly unworkable. That setup that you're provided with in the book. The revised game specific rules do fix that, so that's great. But you also want the errata counter, so there's that. And there's just kind of a lot of errata counters. And I need to complain about errata counters? I do not believe that I do. So I am not a fan of processes that lead to errata counters. I think that is a thing to be avoided. Then again, a map errata can be worse in principle, because it's even harder to fix. Can be. Sometimes it's trivial and you just ignore it, and that's fine. But all right. So we have one full sheet left to go with Fall Blau here. This is going to end up in a 3D printed counter tray solution as well, but we're not going to get to that anytime soon. Atlantic Wall also has by far the greatest number of game-specific rules. It's got a discrete mini game for the airborne invasions of the morning of June 6th, which actually work fair. They take a little bit of time to go through, but I enjoy them every time I've done them, and I've done them 3 or 4 times. There's a beach landing mini game which actually sucks. It's dumb. It doesn't integrate well with the main game or smoothly with the main game, and it is a giant slog and essentially a solitaire experience for the allied player. It is grotesquely overdone, and yet the game does not give you a post-landings scenario. So you either have to create your own June 7th scenario or play through the beach landings. And I strongly don't like that. Now, and I've played Atlantic Wall, and I like Atlantic Wall quite a bit. Actually, it's probably at that scale, it's probably my favorite Normandy game. But it does have these challenges, right? And it's the hardest of the whole bunch to learn. On top of that, next is the Grand Tactical Series from designer Adam Starkweather and now Joe Chacon, and MMP. Now, I say the greatest day here, but there's a greatest day volume 2 coming. That's Utah Beach. This is Sword, Judo, and Gold. This is the one that's out. Now, this is also super duper expensive, but you can also get it on super discount when MMP has a sale, usually to the tune of $100 $125. It is a tremendous package. It's got a ton of stuff. It's got a huge array of scenarios. It uses the latest rules. And because of that, that's my recommendation. Maybe wait for a sale. But the greatest day, Sword, Juno, and Gold. Why did they list them in that order? I'm not sure, but whatever. Runner-up is No Question of Surrender. This is Italians in North Africa. It's a relatively unappealing topic. It is by far the smallest game in the series. And if you have an interest in this topic, that's fine, but I really don't. It also uses the GTS 1 rules, which I think are not as good as the GTS 2 rules. The one to not start with is Where Eagles Dare. This is the southern half of the Market Garden 2-game set. It's ironic because I think The Devil's Cauldron, which was the first game in the series, is a complete masterpiece. It is an amazing game. It's riddled with value. It's got tons of scenarios and game maps and all this stuff. Where Eagles Dare feels really perfunctory. There is a good game there if you just play Regal's Dare, but there's like a mini scenario. It's the training scenario in which you have one unit, a British unit, drives up the road, gets shot at by a German unit, and then drives back. That's the training scenario. Lame. There's the next scenario, I think, is a one map scenario, and all the other scenarios are 4+ maps. So I don't think that's a good choice to start GTS with. And in fact, it's the first GTS game I bought, and I found it to be an enormous turnoff. There is a magazine coming for GTS, which will include a one map GTS game on the Battle for the Tsar. Yeah, keep an eye out for that. And that's supposed to be out from MMP this year as well. Perfidious Albion picked up the Greatest Day. It is a great package. And you get like a scenario for every beach. You get small scenario in addition to the beach scenarios. You get small scenarios, medium scenarios, big scenarios, huge campaign games. Pretty much as you want out of that topic, as long as you're interested in the British side of the beaches, because the Americans aren't in the game. Um, Hopefully, eventually, right? Utah Beach should be out this year as well. Hopefully. But this system is a lot of fun to play. It plays very smoothly. It plays relatively quickly. It is not a high fidelity simulation, but I don't believe it's designed to be, and I am okay with that. So that's the end of that. Bataille. So this is a series I am exploring right now, and again, availability is a factor. So everything on here may be available right now. I don't know if Against the Odds still has those partial copies of La Bataille de Vauchamp. Barring that, Clash of Arms should still have La Bataille de Quatre Bras in the Ziploc, I think. And if they don't, then it's easy to get. Quatre Bras is nice because it's small, frankly. It leads into Waterloo, obviously. It's British versus the French. And it's meeting engagement, largely a meeting engagement. So setup time is fairly minimal. It is on one map and it is relatively small, and you can pretty much pick which La Bataille rules you want to use, right? Use Premier or my recommendation to start with for La Bataille rules. I didn't put this on the slide. Is to start with either Marie Louise or the Premier rules. I think the Premier rules actually look really good to me. I would not recommend starting with the regs or with the 4th or 5th edition or whatever the like full edition is right now. If you want to move on to that, that's cool. I see this all the time because I've got an eBay alert set up for La Bataille. So yes, you'll be able to get it if you're interested in this. And if you can get Vauchamp, do that, right? Because it's smaller and it uses the Premier rules, which I actually think are easier than the Marie Louise rules. But if you can't get that, you should be able to score a copy of Quatre Bras with no difficulty on eBay for less than $50. So this is possible, actually. It's possible we might do. So the trouble with that is you got Gold Juno and Sword, and you got Utah. What do you know? You just have yeah. I mean, I guess you have the gap between the tables where Omaha was supposed to be, right? So that's a bit of a letdown, but that doesn't mean this won't happen. We actually talked about this the year that COVID canceled the con. So I actually have some sympathy for John's point of view on this. I think Waterloo, if we don't see Napoleon lose at Waterloo, Napoleon loses again in a few weeks. I don't think Waterloo is actually the decisive battle. I think Napoleon is basically fucked going into the battle. I don't think things are out of his hands. So Brexit MF says Moscova's one to start with. It does come with Marie Louise rules, but it's freaking huge. There are smaller scenarios in it, so there's that. And I do say, hey, don't start with based on the criteria of size. Mont Saint Jean, which is Waterloo's a fairly complicated battle, and so is Borodino actually. Quatre Bras is a relatively straightforward battle, and that's just going by what I know about the battles. So I would again, as an entry level game, I would strongly favor Quatre Bras over either Mont Saint Jean or Borodino. So there is more than one set of designers as well. And the runner up obviously is Vauchamp if you can get it. The Library of Napoleonic Battles. This might be the series that I'm asked about most often, to be honest about it. And my recommendation remains Napoleon's Wheel for a couple of reasons. One, it's available. Most of the series is actually available, but there's some that aren't. It's available. It contains the universal decks that you'll need to use if you want to use the decks. They're optional, but I do feel that you should at least try playing with the decks. If you end up not liking them, cool, don't play with them anymore. But if you do like them and they do potentially add replay value, then you have the deck you need. You don't have to go buy another deck. Um, all the previous games in the series have game specific decks. Starting with Napoleon's Wheel, they went to a universal deck that all future games in the series will use. So the later games do not include a deck. You can buy the deck from OSG, but they're kind of expensive, to be honest. They're like $30 a deck, and you got to buy one for the French and one for the coalition. So I just as soon send people to Napoleon's Wheel. The other advantage of Napoleon's Wheel is it's got a marquee Napoleonic battle, Austerlitz, and it's got some smaller battles as well. So you can start with smaller battles and work your all the way up to Austerlitz and have a very satisfying experience out of that box. Runners up. This is I thought about how I was going to answer this. Either Napoleon's Last Gamble or the predecessor Napoleon's Last Battles. They are not the same system, but they're closely related systems. I prefer the modern incarnation of this system, but there are other people who prefer Napoleon's Last Battles. And they're not wrong. They're just wrong. You know what I'm saying? So I would favor Napoleon's Last Gamble, aside from the rules, because if you've got all the expansions, it's got, even if you don't have the expansions, it's got a terrific campaign game. So a lot of the other volumes in the series have like disconnected campaign games where, okay, well, the battles all take place, hundreds of miles apart, like in Napoleon against Russia. So you just play the battles in this order and see what happens, right? I'm simplifying a bit, but that's essentially what you do. Whereas in Napoleon's Last Gamble, you can actually set stuff up and treat it as an operational game and conduct the Waterloo campaign. And I think that's actually really cool. And you are given more campaign level options if you get the 2 expansions for Napoleon's Last Gamble. And you will also have some problems getting it all back in the box. Napoleon's Last Battles, I am having trouble. I'm actually in the market for a copy, an SPI copy, let me point out, of Napoleon's Last Battles. And it's actually kind of hard to find one that's in decent shape for a reasonable price. But if you have a copy of Napoleon's Last Battles and you want to try it, play that. That will give you a sense of what Library of Napoleonic Battles is like. But I will say that there's a layer of additional chrome on top, not excessive, but there is a layer of additional chrome on top of the Library of Napoleonic Battles. Steve-O, not a big fan. Got rid of them all. Was frustrated that he could not nail it down. Cartridges were dumb. Combat is wonky. Multiple scales are confusing. There's no multiple scales in this series. In the operational series, there is, and that is confusing. The combat system in this is in Library of Napoleonic Battles is the most frequently criticized element of this game system. So there are a lot of people that just don't like it, and I understand why, because it feels rather bloodless. Nevertheless, I think the way it works makes sense in terms of scale, and I do think it works better in Library of Napoleonic Battles, which has steps, than it did in Napoleon's Last Battles, which kind of had steps, but not really. Don't start with Napoleon at Leipzig because it's an enormous battle. It's the biggest battle in European history until World War One. There are scenarios in it. You don't have to play the entire battle, but you might be unsatisfied by the scenarios. And Napoleon against Russia, which is more or less large disconnected battles. It's a very good volume. Let me say that, but and they're good battles too. Shevardino and Borodino, obviously, and Smolensk are all really good battles. But it suffers in the campaign game. Let me put it that way. Next up is OCS. I'm going to repeat my previous advice with a maybe a new wrinkle, actually. I feel like Smolensk is the best top to bottom introductory game to OCS. It is not one of those that is either designed as an introductory game or is often cited as an introductory game. Those games would be Reluctant Enemies and Tunisia 2. And those are good introductory games, but there are things they leave out. There are things that you won't see in those two games. Smolensk has those things. So I like Smolensk. It's also one map. It's dense, but not incredibly dense. You're not gonna die from the density. There are also smaller scenarios. You can get started with that. The runner-up is actually not Tunisia 2, but Tunisia 1. Because Tunisia 2 is out of print, and so is Tunisia 1, but Tunisia 1 you can get for $20. And there are significant worthy updates to Tunisia 2 that greatly improve the fidelity of the campaign. You don't care about that too much if you're just looking to introduce yourself to the OCS rules. Once again, play with the current rules. It is the rule book is a mirror sheen masterpiece. OCS Korea is actually a really good introduction, and if I had a second runner-up, I probably would have nominated that. And that does have all the pieces as well. You will need an extender as the North Koreans in all likelihood. I think so. I think I'm not misremembering that. Don't start with Case Blue. I started with Case Blue. That was dumb. It's absolutely overwhelming. There are small scenarios in it, but again, a factor is what does it cost to get a copy of Case Blue? If you are lucky, you will pay $450 nowadays for a copy of Case Blue. I could sell my copy that's missing 25 counters for probably $400. If you want an unpunched copy, you are looking at $600 and up, and in a shrink wrap, $800 and up. That's maybe you can do better, but those are prices that I see. Hungarian Rhapsody, not recommended as a starter game for OCS because it essentially replaces a lot of the standard supply methodology for the Soviets. I don't recommend it for that reason. It's a terrific game, but I don't recommend it for maybe a third OCS game. Let me put it that way. Sicily 2, I think, is fine. One of the things that people don't, so there are missing elements in Sicily 2. There are hedgehogs are not in there, for example. And there's the way the hedgehogs affect the surprise roll is actually a little bit hairy. So I recommend that you have that possibility. But it also has the airdrop rules and the amphib rules, and some people don't like to deal with that from a starting standpoint. I don't think those rules are particularly complicated. I also don't think they work particularly well in OCS because OCS was not really designed for that. The I think if you have Sicily 2, yeah, start with that. But I don't know that you need it. And I'm not sure Sicily 2 has extenders, and I know it doesn't have hedgehogs. Stigler says that there is no game worth $600 to him. That's completely reasonable. People got to make their own decisions. Daniel started with Baltic Gap. That is probably my single favorite OCS game, by the way. Baltic Gap is terrific. Well, they originally agreed with this actually because Sicily Triumph and Folly is on 2 maps instead of 1, and you get breakdowns of all the Allied divisions. It's regimental basically, but you get breakdowns of all the Allied infantry divisions, for example, and HQs. So like divisional HQs, that's something that they kind of went away from. I think both Sicily games are very good. I would recommend Sicily 2 over Sicily 1 for a beginner because it's more digestible. So this is true. There are some problems that were corrected in Tunisia 2, but if you're just learning the game and want to pay $20 instead of $120, then I recommend Tunisia 1. I don't think it's quite this simple. Now, I mean, if we are going to say that $600 is too much for a copy of Case Blue, then okay, I agree. But maybe you prefer the OCS system. I mean, I'm punching what is basically mini Case Blue, and not that many, by the way. It's 3.5 maps basically. So Fall Blau is not tiny. Stalingrad 42 covers basically the same topic too, and that's a terrific game. Maybe you'll like one system over the other. I don't know. And certainly you're not getting the 10 map monstrosity experience that you're getting with Case Blue. I mean, it is a huge game, right? You are getting a lot, and that's not $600 MSRP. That's an aftermarket price. Um, I would not count on that ever coming back, but I'd be delighted to be wrong. Density of Hube's Pocket is insane. Yeah, density can be an issue in a lot of OCS games. Holy shit, you should see cross-channel attack. They may have fixed this, but holy shit, you should see it when I saw it. Holy shit, the density is off the hook. There's talk about this. I'm not taking this very seriously until I hear something out of MMP talking about they're thinking about it. To be honest, Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 is the other one that I say don't start with. Again, there's small scenarios you could start with this. Like a number of the East Front games, Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 is very sensitive to good German execution in the early game. And if you don't get that, and you're gonna have significant problems. And probably a concession on the part of the German player not very long into the game. It's also a large game. It's 3 full-size maps plus 3 third-size maps. So it's quite big, quite dense. You do need to know immediately where your extenders are going to go. So there's no learning phase in the campaign of Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2. It's a terrific game. Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 is another one of my favorites. But it's not the best game for beginners. Let me put it that way. Standard Combat Series. Now, all of these games are, with one exception, are relatively easy. Okay, so there's not an enormous leap between, say, Gazala and the Mighty Endeavor and Rostov 41. So pretty much take your pick. I like the Mighty Endeavor for a couple of reasons. One, it's easy to learn. It's a typical complexity level and involvement level for an SCS game. Remember, 8 pages of rules. Typically, game-specific rules run to 4 to 8 pages usually. Easy to learn. It's great to solo, and it's got the new expanded edition has the East Front mode too, where you're battle for Germanying it, where you're playing both sides. So one player plays the Western Allies and the Germans facing the Soviets, and the other player plays the Soviets and the Germans playing the Western Allies. I actually don't like that for the Mighty Endeavor specifically. I would rather just solitaire it, in my opinion. And there's no solitaire mechanism. You're just solitairing it, and it works great. It is a terrific game. I know Tony's talked about this, but I'm not convinced they're listening to Tony. Tony, I'd be delighted to be wrong about that. And if you have been this convincing, then no one will be happier than I. I think they could do that. I just don't think they will. I don't have the faith in the management at MMP that they'll do that. They've just decided, well, we don't do that. So, well, you could just put it on pre-order, and if you don't get the pre-orders, then don't worry about it. And if you do get the pre-orders, then you got the pre-orders. So shut up and reprint it. Yeah, but they don't do that. So, don't ask me about the management decisions being made over there. And they've got things that they know that I don't too. So I'm not even saying they're wrong. I'm just saying I don't expect, without more information than I have, I don't expect Case Blue to ever come back in any form. Again, I will be delighted to be wrong. Okay, so Mighty Endeavor, yes, there are Canadians in there. Scale varies quite a bit with SCS. That's absolutely true. It's intended to be fairly flexible. And if you look at things like the stacking limit, for example, varies from game to game. That's weird, right? To say, well, we got the series rules, but the stacking limits in the game-specific rules. Bastogne is another one that I thought about. It's an excellent game. It's an excellent starter game for SCS. Now I can justify that. Even if I'd paid $800 for it, I've played it. So I think I will have gotten my money's worth of it. I'm becoming uncomfortable in this chair, by the way. I think we're going to try and buzz through the rest of these. Now, on the other hand, if it's $300 or $600, whatever, for a shelf ornament, then I totally agree. But you have to have the intent. I mean, for me to pay that kind of money, I have to have the intention of playing it. That's even the case with Second Front, right? I'll play Second Front again. I have no doubt. The CRT varies too. That's absolutely true. Panzer Battles, I didn't like Panzer Battles. I got to be honest. I played about 4 turns of Panzer Battles and didn't like it. Rostov 41 is a very good introductory game, though. Good situation, easily digestible, and they're bringing it back into print. It Never Snows is, excuse me, I have It Never Snows. I have not played it. It does use the dreaded road movement or road march rules that a lot of people don't like in SCS. It is big. I believe it's 5 maps. 5 maps? 4 maps? It's big. I think it's 4 maps. It's big. Counter density wise, it's not, but it's Market Garden, so it doesn't necessarily have to be. But map wise, it's real big. But nevertheless, It Never Snows looks fairly promising. Now, my do not choose here is Day of Days. Now, there's 2 reasons for this. One, I've played Day of Days and strongly disliked it for on a number of levels. And it's a little bit baffling that I had such a negative reaction to it. But one of the things I think that SCS is good at is smaller games, right? And Day of Days is a big game. It's again 4 maps, company level D-Day. I think that scale does not work for SCS. I think play of it is actually fairly boring. I think the maps are ugly, even though they're by an artist who has done wonderful work on every other map of his I have seen. I do not like those maps. I think they are ugly and hard to read. The counter density is off the charts, especially on with the airdrops and the invasions. There's a kludgy way around that where you can just stack as many as you want. I'm simplifying. I had a pretty negative reaction and experience with Day of Days, and we obviously didn't finish the game. I said, this sucks. Let's play something else. But there are people that really like Day of Days too, so listen to them if you're inclined to. The vassal modules for the gamer stuff in general tend to be good to very good. So I do find that believable, but I don't think that it will make the gameplay more engaging. It will just help with stack management, which is a problem in the physical game. But I think it's a bad match of scale and topic and system. I think that's fundamentally my problem with Day of Days. I think if you turned it into a battalion level game, I think I'd be much more interested in that. Dean might not be. Victory in the West and related series. So we're all over the map on this. And I'm partly inspired by the fact that I'm punching Fall Blau and would like to get it to a table or Kharkov Battles to a table at some point. This is a sort of a basic concept where you have a randomized unit strength. It's been used by a lot of different designers from a lot of different publishers. Victory in the West is kind of the generic name that properly refers only to these 3 games that appeared in S&T, but more broadly to several other games that came out from SPI, as well as from other publishers. I will get to TCS in a second here. I don't have a slide for TCS because I've never played TCS, but I do have an opinion. Why not? I think the best game to get started with here, it's not the most interesting to me, is Patton's Third Army. Despite the hideous Howard Chaykin cover, I think this is the best game. I think it's the most, it's the sort of the leanest combination with attractive topic. Personally, I think Sicily Race to Messina is more interesting, but at the same time, Sicily Race to Messina is the most complicated of those 3 by a significant margin. So I don't say to start with that. If you want to runner up, start with Kharkov Battles, which is more or less the Victory in the West system with some different chrome, but not that different. That's from Compass. That's from Greg Blanchett. It's a standalone that also adds on to Fall Blau if you want to play the 2 together. And don't start with Jaws of Victory because it is or Overlord and Killing Ground for that matter. Overlord and Killing Ground, for one thing, you'll pay $300 or $400 for. But Jaws of Victory, I believe, is still available from New England Simulation. It is an amazing looking package, but it is definitely a level above, say, the S&T Victory in the West games or Fall Blau and Kharkov Battles in terms of complexity. It's definite, and it's also an attractive topic. It's the Cherkasy Pocket. So, I hate that cover. It's a terrible cover. It just doesn't. It just doesn't look like an S&T cover. It looks like a Sergeant Rock cover, right? Because Chaykin is a comic book artist. So Killing Ground is way too pricey. I've got it. It's supposed to be really good. I'd like to play it at some point, but at some point I got to get in it and organize it as well. So so complexity wise, I think your best bet is either Patton's Third Army or Operation Grenade. I think that would be fine too. Or if you want something new with better graphics and without a delightful Howard Chaykin cover, look at Kharkov Battles from Compass, and that's got a decent sized campaign in it and several small scenarios. Is this the last one? Maybe. Okay, I think this is the last one. The Simonich ZoC Bond series. This is another one where I don't really think it matters a whole lot which one you start with. These are a not strictly a series. I'm including them in this series discussion because I get asked about these all the time. Oh, that would have been. See, this could have been. I actually really like the cover for Freedom in the Galaxy on its own. I think it would be worse with a Howard Chaykin cover. So good call though. So, any of the Simonich games they're not really simple, but they're not really complicated either. They are good mid-range, fairly crunchy, fairly satisfying, not too long a playtime war games. There is a specific niche in which these fit really well and maybe better than any kind of other series of related games floating around right now. I think Holland 44 is the best place to start because I think it's a tense and engaging game. It plays on a relatively small footprint, relatively small. It's like a map and a third. So I would start with Holland 44, but a close runner up here is Salerno 43 because Salerno 43 plays on a half map. Now it's first in the projected trilogy. I've heard nothing other than that on the subsequent games in the series, and I know neither of them are Simonich's next game because that's the new North Africa game. But really, any of these games are fine. I've played Stalingrad 42. I actually haven't played, and it only say don't start with Stalingrad 42 because it's the biggest one. It's big, but it's not that big. If you played it at a convention, it'd take you a couple of days to play. It's same with Ardennes 44. It's big, but it's not that big. I think you can play. I think Stalingrad 42 is actually probably a little more forgiving to a learning player than Ardennes 44 is. Bulge games tend to be very brittle because of the topic, because if the Germans don't start well, then they're not going to end well. You know what I'm saying? So Salerno 43 does have more Canadians than Holland 44. Yes, that's true. And their Holland 44 is terrific. I have nothing but good things to say. By the way, we started a game of Normandy 44 over the weekend, and that's a personal favorite as well. I think it's a great Normandy game. Unfortunately, the power went out while we were playing, so we had to stop. I think Anzio and/or Casino. Not sure where Casino fits into that plan. There's that thing on GMT's website about the next two games in the series. So, see, there you go. That's a good idea. Have a Canadian rating. Dan would approve of that, I am sure. All right, so I think that's the last of the slides. So let me pull that down. We did slides this week. Very organized. Very organized. Thanks in part to the scotch. The headache's gone, so that's cool. So anyway, so tomorrow we will have the show with Dan. We will have a special guest. I will announce that tomorrow when I give the special guest the link to the show. But you should probably expect more of that too. So we will have a special guest tomorrow on the show with Dan. It will be on both channels, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. There isn't minimally. I've got several other videos in the pile, but that editing. But there is an unboxing video this week. It is Fall Blau. There's another unboxing video that I'm waiting to release. That could be next week, could be the week after. I'm not sure yet. As soon as I can release it, I will release it, and then I can happily start clipping that game. So, we are. Looks like we did pretty good here. Did I pull up the? Looks like we topped out about 154, which is a pretty good number. I'm happy with that. So I would like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Your support is appreciated as always. If you haven't yet, please do thumbs up the video. Please do subscribe to the channel if for some reason you're not already subscribed. Feel free to share these videos around, by the way. So, and if you'd like to do more to support the show, check out the Patreon, the Ko-Fi, all that stuff are other ways to support the show. So those things are much appreciated as well. So again, thanks everybody for coming out. Really got to get busy on that outro video, which we still haven't done. I guess I could put the moose thing up, but that's kind of me and Dan's thing, and I don't want to step on Dan like that. So I mean, Dan is easy enough to step on, if you know what I'm saying.